Shall we briefly talk about today's scriptures before we begin Mass? In today's first reading, we have a reading from the book of Sirach. Sirach lived in 2nd century BC, so it's one of the last books of the Old Testament. It is not included in Protestant Bibles, and so we refer to it as one of the apocryphal writings, which simply means it's one of those books. Sirach is one of those books that's not in Protestant Bibles, but is only in Catholic Bibles. It's part of the Apocrypha. It's one of those books that's found only in Catholic Bibles. It was written in 2nd century BC, and it was written within a context in which the Jews were very infatuated, if you will, with Hellenistic culture and Hellenist philosophy. So all of this Greek culture and Greek philosophy was influencing the Jews, and so Sirach, or Ben Sirach as we call him, had this need to be able to write to his contemporaries of that time. The exhortation today comes from a longer exhortation on family life. How it is, for instance, that children are to respect and honor and obey their parents. And so we have, for instance, in line 4, how it is that if you honor your parents, what will happen? You will live a long life, and you'll be gladdened by children of your own. So those were two traditional blessings. They believe that two blessings for people would be to live a long life and to be blessed with children. And so if you honor your parents and if you obey your parents, then you'll be blessed with a long life and gladdened by children, says it. In the 8th line, we see how it is that we are to love and care for our parents, especially when they approach old age. Says today's reading, take care of your parents when they are old, even if their minds fail, be considerate of them. So we see that the sacred duty that we have as children toward our parents. Today's second reading comes from the letter to the Colossians. We remember that this is one of the pseudonymous letters attributed to Paul, meaning St. Paul did not write the letter to the Colossians, but someone wrote in Paul's name and in Paul's spirit. We remember that Colossians and Ephesians are really twin letters, both written in Paul's name, but we know that neither of them was written by Paul. In today's second reading, as we'll talk about a little later in the Mass, we have this beautiful image of how we're supposed to clothe ourselves with various virtues. In the same way that we put on our clothes in the morning, we have to put on various virtues. We also need to love and forgive and bear with one another. We see how it is that in the 5th line, it says, as the Lord has forgiven you, so must you also do to others. We must forgive as God has forgiven us. Does that sound familiar from the Our Father? Forgive us as we forgive others. That thought is expressed here in the letter to the Colossians. How it is that we're called to control ourselves and live in peace with one another and be thankful. And so all of those words are in today's second reading, the letter to the Colossians. You'll note that we're using the short form. There are two forms of today's second reading. We do the short form or the longer form. What's the difference? The longer form continues with various admonitions about wives being submissive to their husbands. We remember that the Bible was written in a world in which women were viewed as inferior and subordinate to men. There were men and there were women, which is why St. Paul's writings are so radical. St. Paul says in his letter to the Galatians, there is no Jew or Greek, slave or free, woman or man. All of us are one in Christ. We know that Jesus had this radical vision of a discipleship of equals, where men and women are equals. And so for this letter to the Colossians to talk about women being subordinate to men, wow, that one is hard to place with all of the other rich stories that we have from the Bible, both of Jesus and of St. Paul. How it is that someone could write in Paul's name saying that women should be subordinate to men is hard to fathom. In today's gospel, then, we have a story from Jesus' childhood. So how interesting. In Mark and in John, there's nothing about Jesus' childhood. In the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, we have some stories of Jesus' childhood. Matthew tells us about the birth and how it is that the Magi came to visit, Luke gives us a story of the birth with the census and the appearance of the shepherds. But then after that, he tells us the story of the presentation in the temple, which is today's gospel. He flashes forward to age 12 when Jesus is found in the temple, and then flashes forward to Jesus' baptism at about age 30. So today's story is of Jesus' presentation in the temple and how it was that Simeon and Anna recognized this child was being brought to the temple. Why was Jesus being brought to the temple? There were two rituals that needed to be practiced. One was the ritual of Mary's purification. Why did Mary need to be purified? We remember that in the old law, in the law of Moses, anyone who touched blood, blood is a very sacred thing associated with life. And so anyone who touched blood needed to be purified. And so Mary, after having given birth, presuming that there's some blood associated with that, needed to be purified. And the other rite that needed to be performed in the temple was the consecration of the firstborn to God. So, presuming that Jesus was the firstborn son, to whom did the firstborn son belong? The firstborn son belonged to God. And so if Jesus belonged to God, the ransom, the buying back of that son, involved what we have here as the pair of turtle doves or two young pigeons. And so the two young pigeons was the way Mary and Joseph then bought these two turtle doves or pigeons and offered them as a way of buying back or ransoming their firstborn son, which, according to the Jewish law, belonged to the Lord. In today's gospel, Simeon recognizes Jesus as something special. In religious life, we call his words the Nunc dimittis. It's the words that religious and priests say every night for night prayer. The words are found there beginning in line 13 of the Gospel, where it says, "Now, Master, you may let your servant go in peace, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all your peoples." Very famous words, because Simeon was waiting for the appearance of the Messiah, the Christ. And so, how it is that Simeon recognized that this Jesus, this infant, was the Messiah. Anna, as well, a prophetess, was in the temple and recognized them. This gospel really raises questions of us as to whether we recognize the presence of Christ in others as well. Are we like Simeon and Anna, recognizing the presence in Christ? And can others recognize Christ in us? In the same way that Simeon and Anna recognized the presence of Christ, can others recognize Christ in us?